we all have transitional objects that help us take a piece of home with us when we leave home, when we leave the safety. It sounds almost as though your ex is that transitional object of the lighthouse. And so the work can be, how do I find the next lighthouse? Now that I know a lighthouse exists and he will always be there, how can I lean on that security, much like I may have if I had that from childhood with my parents, and go find a person?
I completely agree. And Richard, don't let any future girlfriends listen to this episode because you will be dumped after. And I apologize in advance. This is Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Hey, welcome to Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Today I'm hanging out with Talia Bombola, licensed marriage and family therapist and psychology professor. We're talking all about our own dating lives, relationships, and attachment styles. Hello, Talia. Good to see you today.
You too. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm not enjoying the darkness coming early, but other than that, I'm okay.
What state are you in?
I'm in California.
Oh, you are in what part?
Southern California.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, I grew up in San Bernardino County, so I grew up out there. Not quite as pretty as Orange County, or pretty at all for that matter, but I can relate to the Southern California for sure.
Yes.
Yes. And in California, you do, I know you're a professor and then you also do therapy as well.
Yeah. So I'm an adjunct professor. I am a marriage family therapist. And then I also do coaching and mentorship. And then I have all the other business stuff that I do. I have like an e-commerce business, 3 podcasts, and I'm the pre-licensed director for Orange County Camped. So
holy shit. Okay. So you stay about as busy as I do. Just hang out, just chill. Yeah. Are you, do you have a partner or like
yes,
personal life at all?
Yes, I do. I
don't. So I'm just curious, you know, what that's like for you.
One of my favorite episodes, it reminded me of Modern Family, where she's like, how's things? And she's like, no, I'm literally asking you what it's like to have things. Because she's dating
exactly.
I do. I have a thriving personal life. I have a great partnership, a great family, and a lot of good friends, I would say. I'm more ambiverted, so I don't always like to decompress around other people, especially with what we do for work. Being a therapist, I'm around people a lot with like a lot of energy and intense emotion. So when I have time off, I just like chilling, being outdoors, going on walks. I'm a big fan of bubble baths. I'm big into like self-care when it comes to just being the literal self, just me caring for me, time away from people.
I feel like I totally just put you on the defense. Like, and how do you take care of yourself? And not at all what I'm doing, by the way, because I'm the last to judge on that. But glad to hear you've got your life together. It must be nice.
Yes, it is. It took a while and constantly moving parts, but this year I finally hired out some help, which helped so much in all the things. Like in the I've talked about this before in other podcasts, but in the beginning, it was like, for most of us, you have an abundance of time. So you use that to build all that other people I've sure built other people I'm sure have built other things. And right. I've used it to build all that I have. And it wasn't until this year that I'm like, okay, this is way too much to have on my plate. I want it all to exist. I just don't want to do it anymore. So I offloaded everything I possibly could.
And what a good feeling. I mean, when you get to the point where you're like, I have more than I have the ability time-wise to do that. I mean, what a symbol of growth, I'm sure. That's got to feel great for you.
Yes. I often am shocked. I'm like, who was I all those years ago that built all of this? And I realized like all those years ago, I did not have a partner. The same one that I have now. I'm like not in a lifelong relationship back then. It was just dating or relationships. And I think it's much different when you are in the beginning and you want to do all these things. And there's this, I always say when I'm doing like business coaching, it's like you have the audacity when you're climbing that first mountain. And then once you've built all that you've built and you're not doing things out of need or to have your basic needs met anymore, and you have to want it or you would like to do it, it's a much different way to be motivated. So that's where I'm at, climbing like the proverbial second mountain.
Yes. And does your partner do similar work or?
No, he is a firefighter.
Okay. Got it.
Still helping people. That's where we align, but we're not, I don't think I could date a therapist.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that, Talia.
Tell me how that makes you feel. I like being the expert in that domain.
Oh,
So, I
okay.
think that's why I would feel comfortable with it. Plus, I I like having somebody who's totally different. I think I learn a lot, and there's just a different temperament style. Plus, I have a theory that most male therapists happen to be highly narcissistic. Not all of them. Obviously, I have 2 male therapists for my co-host of my other podcast, but as like an overall on dating apps from a lot of what I've seen, I'm like, this is concerning or this is suspicious. So,
Yeah, that covert narcissism is a real son of a bitch, right?
oh
Especially
yeah,
in like the helping profession. So therapy or pastor roles, or we see a lot of that covert narcissism. So
yeah,
yeah, I hear you. And I think that, I mean, for all genders, that's certainly in the helping profession, we run into that covert narcissism,
ton.
because it's like the altruism, but is anything really altruistic
No,
is
I
my
tell
cynical
my
view.
I'm like, you still feel good when you do it. So there's no such thing as truly altruistic. You get nothing
Thank
from it.
you.
You get feeling good from it or more.
Yes, I completely agree. So on that note, we're gonna get get into where our fucked up cynical views come from, talking about attachment.
My
So
favorite.
yes, you and I hung out on your podcast, and we talked all about attachment, and I just loved our conversation so much. And so that is, what we're going to do today. Where do you usually start with even breaking that down for people? Yeah.
So I start by, because I do psychoanalysis, so I start by describing where it comes from and the foundation of it, and then I scoop in or add in what that looks like in live time or in like day-to-day life. So does that sound good
Okay.
to you?
Right. And so how do you feel like that differs? Give us some, like, let's start with anxious. How does that look different when you use psychoanalysis?
So anxious attachment, oh, it's hard to start there. I'll do
Oh,
my best.
where would you like to start? What feels
I
comfortable
think
to you?
starting with secure attachment
Oh,
is a
well,
good
that's
example.
optimistic.
The lucky ones, as I call them. So when we're looking at it from more of a psychoanalytic lens, secure attachment is based in the infant mother relationship, and a lot of the writing is on mother, but this really is any primary caregiver that you could swap in. We just happen to use mother. And how much twinship, how much mirroring, how much were you met by your parent when you needed them, and how many times were you missed when you
Mhm.
needed them, but they couldn't attend to you for whatever reason, especially when it comes to infancy. And we've often seen with parents who have their own anxiety or anxious attachment. It's fascinating during in observation when the mom can't tolerate the baby looking away from her when they're having those moments, and she tries to keep getting the eye contact, and it's very inundating for the infant. It feels intrusive.
Mhm.
So any small interaction like that, all the way to those day-to-day interactions, is my diaper being changed? Am I being fed? Am I being nurtured? If I cry after all those needs are met, will somebody still come be with me? Only because I'm having these emotions until I can calm down. Can they teach me? Co-regulation is really important, especially when we're talking about attachment as well. So I like to start by talking about secure attachment at the base, that
Mhm.
you were met enough times that it overshadowed most of the times that you were missed, and you can have a positive outlook on other people and trust in yourself. So if we're like looking at Erickson's psychosocial stages of development, you have the trust, you've gotten that as a virtue, you have more of the autonomy, you have that sense of initiative, you're climbing through like the positive ends of those two-sided scales. And
Right.
then when we look at anxious or avoidant attachment stemming from infancy, I received inconsistent caregiving and I coped with it in one of 2 ways. And then we can
Sure.
talk about disorganized afterwards. But if I learned
Yeah.
that it wasn't going to be consistent and I kept seeking it and I kept having to feel like I needed to be a certain way in order to obtain it, that usually manifests as anxious attachment. And then in avoidant attachment, I learned to be self sufficient because I interpreted my needs wouldn't be met. I have difficulty relying on other people or feeling close to other people because what if they fail me? What if I have to do it for myself? Then you have that like fearful avoidant. It's like a little scoop of both. And
Sure.
then disorganized attachment is when the exact people who should have and could have kept you safe from abuse and the terrors of the world caused the abuse and terrors of the world. So the foundation, it's really when we're seeing children who severed or suffered from really severe childhood abuse. They grew up in maybe foster homes, groups homes, adoption. That primal bond was ruptured very early on. And there's I'm writing about, I will give you an excerpt. I'm writing about it in one of the books that I'm writing, but it's almost like they're metaphorically holding this like umbilical cord that got severed too early, and they're waiting to try and find a way to reconnect, but it just feels so scary for them to try and connect to anybody because of that very primal wound.
Yeah, and that disorganized, that's the attachment style I actually identify with, and that I think that historically it often does, it has been given to individuals who have gone through those very overt traumatic upbringings. But what I have started to notice from my clients, my personal experience, that there's a lot of that covert trauma that also leads to the disorganized. And especially when we think about covert coming in the form of psychological abuse. And I don't think that psychological abuse is talked about enough, that could be done through certain looks, certain facial expressions, whispering,
treatment.
Yeah. And so I think like that, that's, I guess, my pushback a little bit on the disorganized is that, no, I grew up with two parents who stayed married until a couple of years ago. I mean, they were married for over 30 whatever years. And they still found a way to create some disorganized children. So, I really like to normalize that because of the stigma around that.
And that's such a good point that you bring it up. It doesn't have to be the severe abuse. Often when I've worked with couples who come in for more of that psychodynamic, psychoanalytic treatment, it does stem from more of the physical abuse or the neglect where they were missed oftentimes. And these are more severe cases, obviously, who are coming in for treatment. And there's an inherent bias, I think, that we have with the cases that we see in front of us. So I'm really appreciative that you brought that up, because it does come from other things that are not related to the severe physical. It can be the emotional neglect or the psychological abuse that's silent, that we really can't prove. So sometimes we live with it being tucked away. It wasn't that bad. They were present. They were married. There's all these reasons why it shouldn't be as bad, or why other people might tell us, well, you didn't have it that bad, but it's in the eye of the beholder and the person who went through it. So I'm really appreciative that you brought that up.
And I think that the way that you described it is perfect. And I can completely relate to that. Is the people who were supposed to, I mean, that's our sole purpose as a parent, is to keep that child safe. And they were actually the ones to inflict harm. And that, that evokes emotion for me, like when you were saying that, because that is so true. And I've written quite a bit on that as well, is that just the mind fuck of that, right? That like the idea of, I'm scared, so I should be able to have somebody to go to, but then that place to go to is even scarier than what I'm scared of. And that push and pull. And so I think you described that perfectly. And then, as you said, the lucky ones. So let's go back to secure. Must be nice.
Must be nice, right? Yes. I would say secure attachment, if we're looking at it coming from infancy or something that we can earn or learn later on in our life, it is a consistent positive reinforcement pattern with a safe object. So if we're looking at like self-psychology object relations, can this person tolerate all of my affects? Can they be there for me when I have a psychic collapse and I freak out? Can they be there for me when I'm very excited and I need support? Are all parts of me and all versions of me welcome? And am I comfortable being close to them and comfortable taking space away? And those moments of connection and individuation over time, that's how we can learn to have secure attachment if we didn't have all of those elements from our infant and caregiver relationship growing up.
Yeah. And great point, because that is the whole basis of when people ask us, can you change your attachment style? And we absolutely, through those corrective experiences, right? And that the way you're describing it, I mean, that's exactly spot on, because while it would have been ideal to get that from our caregivers in upbringing, that doesn't mean that we can't have a partner or a best friend or a mentor or other people who start to create that foundation. How often do you see that happen, like for your clients that they are able to find that secure base and start to shift that?
I would say pretty high success rate. Some I can't report because they've terminated treatment for moving or et cetera during COVID. So we couldn't continue if they didn't want to. We couldn't because they moved to different states, or they moved within California, but they didn't want to do telehealth. So I would refer them out. But I would say between 85 to 95% have been able to secure themselves. And that buffer number is if that's their goal. Some
Sure.
people are coming in with the goal of acquiring a romantic relationship. They would just like to not feel like a raw nerve walking through life, or like a very shut off, numbed out nerve walking through life. And then eventually the relationship comes with time, or they, I'm sure, have had that after we've met all their goals and more. And then I do get emails where they're like, I found the person, I'm so happy, thank you so much. And that's always exciting to see.
For sure. Do you run into where maybe your clients struggle with understanding the idea of secure enough? And so like we get the people who are like, no, but I still got mad at him for not texting me back. It's like, yeah, no shit, you're human. That happens. Like, how do you usually manage that?
I think that I manage that best by having them feel comfortable enough to express all of the feelings that come along with it. And then I ask, okay, noted. And what would be different? Where can we get your own individual level of secure enough? And what would that look like? Would it look any different than it is now? And sometimes they say, no, it wouldn't. So then that lets me know we have to do a little bit more emotional work, instead of it being like, let's make an environmental shift or a relationship shift. So if, especially for anxiously attached people, that striving for perfection or that fantasy partner, and I know that happens with avoidant attachment as well, that phantom ex, phantom other, what could be good enough and what can you tolerate? How much can you take in and how much closeness do you want? Because what happens when your partner starts giving you all that the maybe typically avoidant people, if you're anxious, that you've dated have never given you before, what are you going to do with it? And one of my favorite analytic papers is called You're Giving Me What I Need, But I Have No Place to Put It. And I mean, we could unpack that for a whole episode too, but that is kind of how it feels sometimes when we finally get all that we've wanted. And if we've done our work of securing ourselves, we've created enough space to be able to receive that, what is being given to us.
Yeah, and that distinction is crucial. I talk to my clients about that all the time, that the work to heal your attachment wounds it takes place individually, but then also relationally.
Yes.
And so many people, and I would love to dig into this, because that our societal just like bullshit message of you have to love yourself before anyone else can love you. And that is just screwing people up left and right, because really the idea is, yes, we do have to do our own healing, but then the corrective experiences that we are talking about, we don't heal in isolation. You can't heal a wound that happened in relationship in isolation.
True. So I don't agree. I'm with you that I also don't agree with the statement that, you have, before you can love yourself. What is it again? Can you say it again?
Yeah, you have to you have to love yourself before before anyone else will love you, or you can.
Yes. I think there's a certain level that an individual has to reach within themselves to be able to accept love from another. So it's not the exact way, and I'm not even going to butcher it again. It's not the exact way the phrase goes, but I don't think until you feel worthy of love, you can recognize love, you can receive love, give. I think there's a lot of the inner work to be ready and available to receive it. So somebody could be trying to love you in all of the ways and all of the love languages, and you might not know all those ways about yourself, so you block it, or you don't feel worthy of it and you don't want it because you feel incapable of reciprocating it, so you shut it down. So I think it's a little bit different, and I'm sure other people have talked about that too, but that's kind of my view of that concept in society. Is there's a little truth to it, more about the self-worth, self-esteem, which is kind of the area that I specialize in.
Yeah, and I think that the issue comes in though when we want people to learn how to be able to accept love without having the opportunity to practice it. And so I think that that's when somebody's in relationship, that I mean, first of all, I completely agree with what you're saying. And with a lot of clients, single clients, we'll do like a lot of EMDR. We'll work through a lot of the trauma the early on and help them to really start to shift beliefs. And then even
Right.
how are they interacting with the coworker that upset them or the friend that rejected them? We're able to use those early on as these examples. But then I think that the other part of the healing you have to be in it to be able to learn how to do it, because otherwise we can hypothesize what, or imagine,
Right.
but we don't actually practice it.
Yes, I think it has to be done or would best be done concurrently. So
Sure.
doing the self work, and a lot of attachment can actually repair with a therapist. That's why I like long-term therapy. And
Yeah.
because it can take, the most recent study was from about a year and a half ago that I saw in therapy, at least, that it takes about like 3.5 to 4 years of consistent weekly treatment for if we're only looking at that, for an attachment style to shift. So big proponent of analytic style therapy, especially when the research backs it, that it has to be done concurrently. How can we have you, and I call dating partners practice partners. It's not to be demeaning, but they're practice. They're practice for, how do I attach? How do I connect? How do I individuate? Could I tolerate being with you for the rest of my life? Or is this going to be too much on my nervous system and too much on my attachment system that I don't think either of us could be our best self as a partner if we're constantly pushing on each other's triggers? And I think of anxious and avoidant attachment almost like a competitive chess clock.
Mm.
And the closer you get to all of those wounds, the more it's just like, and they're just going back and forth rapidly. And if you
Yeah.
don't have to, meaning if you're just dating for the first time and learning this about yourself, if you don't have to end up with a partner who really pushes on you versus people who discover it later in life, this awareness of, oh, I think I've been in that anxious avoidant dance with my fiance, husband, etc., for 5 or 10 years, there's still help. Attachment systems can be changed, but if
Mhm.
you can help it to not activate entirely, that's like the ideal goal. So I think doing the inner work at the same time that you're healing relationally, and if your inner work is suffering because the healing relationally is too triggering or activating, slowing it back, taking a pause, and maybe working with the therapist as like a pseudo corrective experience, and then launching back out there.
Yeah, I mean, and truly is a corrective experience that we're able to offer in those settings. I think that a lot of people don't even realize that they're in the anxious avoidant because it is so similar. It's what they know. So they wouldn't even know I'm in a dance right now. They just think this is just relationships. Like
Yep.
one person pulls, the other pushes back and forth, or, I'm always chasing, I'm always needy. Everyone out there is always rejecting me. Like it's just this idea that it is so universal versus really realizing these are my life experiences that are being played out repeatedly.
That's where I love repetition compulsion as a concept. So you seek out what you had in childhood, whether it was good or not, or beneficial or not, because it's familiar. And so
Right.
not everything that we're familiar with is a quality thing for us, and things that were previously adaptive coping strategies do become maladaptive at a certain point when they get in the way of being in a real relationship with the person in front of you, as I like to say.
And those adaptive behaviors, as you're describing, that are so linked with the anxious and avoidance. So, as you were saying earlier, that if we can get attention if we beg for it enough, as a child, if we're obnoxious enough, if we cry enough, if we tantrum enough, whatever we have to do to get that attention, or with the avoidant, same thing.
Yes.
They feel uncomfortable, so they retreat.
Yep.
And those adaptive behaviors we develop for survival, and so they were so beneficial for us at one point, but then as you're describing, they become maladaptive, and they actually, the whole purpose of them at one point was for us to be able to obtain safety and connection.
Yes.
And now the very thing we still want in adulthood, safety and connection, they are creating, I mean, they're completely pushing that away. It's
Mhm.
a really hard concept for people to wrap their heads around.
This is I totally agree, and this is where slowing down and understanding, for those of people the people listening, slowing down and understanding what makes you feel safe and calm when you're anxious is the exact thing that's going to activate the avoidant partner's anxiety to not feel safe and not feel calm. And the converse is true, or inverse is true as well. So if I'm avoidant and space helps me to feel soothed, too much closeness is going to make me feel anxious. So it's difficult to put the shoe on the other foot, whatever the phraseology might be that feels best. But looking at it from that perspective can really help develop sympathy and empathy for the other position, even if we don't like it, even if we wish it were different, because we want somebody to be so close to us. It's a delusion that we have to get over. In analysis, especially, it takes people quite some time. You don't actually want somebody who's exactly like you, because you would drive you nuts oftentimes. And I've had people come in, very high power figures, are like, I do not want to date somebody who's this intense. I need somebody who's my counterbalance, who can calm me down. Similarly with attachment styles, I want somebody who can stand there like a lighthouse in the storm and let me take my space so I can come back, or be there and I can be close. And that's the way to create the safest environment would to be emulating that lighthouse in the storm for your partner. Even if you aren't secure yourself, what is it like to just sit there and be, and surf the urge to run away, or surf the urge to try and reconnect and get closeness? And then you can learn to tolerate it. And that window of tolerance can slowly collapse in a safe way. And then you can now have secure attachment. So if you learn to tolerate the very thing that you go to as a coping skill to not do it and just sit there and be the lighthouse, you too can have secure attachment.
Yes. If you just do the impossible, you too can be healthy.
Yes, it's like Houdini.
Yes, I completely agree. And as humans, we are designed for adaptation. And so if
Yes.
we can sit in the discomfort, which is exactly what we do anytime we learn something new, anytime we do something new, it is uncomfortable because we don't know it well, but we can learn it if we're willing to do it. But that starts with the self-awareness of even that I'm feeling triggered right now, and I have two choices. I can do what I've always done, or I can choose a different route.
Yeah.
But that different route, and I know for me personally, sometimes that different route, like, it's got me feeling like I'm going to crawl out of my skin. Like, it's just so overwhelming. So I completely normalize and have empathy for, people who struggle with choosing that different approach. And it's taken me years and years and years, and I still struggle. So
I proud, anxiously attached. I have now
congratulations.
my partner is the most secure person on earth. I have determined that. He's the oldest of 6, and his family is very, very healthy. I lucked out. I hit the jackpot. And there's times I look at him and I'm just like, what's it like? Like, in your brain, he's like, it's fine. Why? And I'm like, well, just curious. What was it like having totally secure attachment since childhood? And he's like, what? And now he knows all the terms. So I love when he uses them. But it's so amazing what can happen when you are with somebody who can be so secure. And it's not a facade. It is truly genuine from the ground up, like from infancy up, so secure. And it's such a healthy template that it allowed me to secure myself. And I'd already worked towards that with previous partners, but I would pick the avoidant, the narcissist when I was struggling with codependency a lot, and then back to the avoidant, and then the anxious. And then I've sampled the whole smorgasbord, if you will. And I feel as though I wouldn't have been prepared to be with someone so secure and spend a lifetime with someone so secure had I not done a lot of that work, and had I not dated other kinds of people. And it still flares up from time to time, but I can now share that with him and say, hey, I'm having that moment where 14-year-old me is coming out, and can you just be with us? And he's like, okay. And he'll just sit there on the couch while I cry. The other night I had a breakdown. I'm like, I'm the worst partner. I've been so stressed about. He's like, I love you. Have I said that to you? And I was like, no. He's like, why are you crying? I was like, because I just have a lot of feelings. He's like, so secure. And I'm like, okay, so you're not mad? He's like, no. And I love you, and I'll never leave you, and we're going to be okay. And I was just like, I love you so much.
Now I love you even more.
Right? And I'm like, that was a sex. Like, this is the best. But had I dated him at any other point, or been like, we're doing this for life at any other point, I would have blown it up 1000%. And I very much so did early on, at least a few times. And I remember, like, one of our first dates, he came over to watch a movie, and he was so tired from whatever like work thing he had, and he fell asleep and I was like, oh no, like alarms are going off in my mind. I'm like, I'm being abandoned. I was not. He literally just felt comfortable and safe enough to fall asleep on my couch. Like, not at all what my brain was saying. And I was like, the this, the that. And he was like, why are you freaking out right now? And I was like, I'm not. I'm so calm. Like, me? little old me, he's like, "It's gonna be okay. I'll just come over tomorrow and we can watch it." I was like, "You wanna see me again?" Like, I had all that self-worth, self-esteem going on underneath, and I'm well into adulthood, and I think having that for so long that everything I had wanted was now happening, I knew I had to change. I had to work on my stuff and not do what I'd always done, and it yielded wonderful results, and that and learning that men think differently than women do, those are my two, I think, key ingredients to having secure attachment and knowing that, God forbid, if he ever passed away and I had to ever date again, which I never would want to at this point, I think I could do it securely because I've done so much work and I now have all of those fantasies proven true. So now I know it's real and now I won't settle for less.
And doing all that work helps us to be that much more even aware of like the red flags leading up to it. And so I think, like, I talk with my clients about that a lot when they're dating, is the more healing you do and the more of that processing of previous experiences, you will, the things that you have been historically attracted to, that it's like, oh, you're an asshole, that's kind of sexy, you know, like that's no longer going to be sexy to you. That will start to be repulsive. And I think that's one of the most powerful things of doing the work, is that you catch it before getting into it. And then if you get into it and you both have your own red flags, of course, but you're able to work through it more effectively because you're choosing somebody that is much more on your wavelength than, you know, the opposite end.
Oh yes. The studies that have come out that women, especially in their young 20s, are highly attracted to that dark triad personality traits. It's very true because it's edgy. It's the bad boy. It's the emblem of everything we were never allowed to or shunned away from picking if we're in a heteronormative lens. And it's sexy and it's brooding. And there's this primal protective, and there is something to it. And we've seen this across other species as well, that we pick partners who could be the best at procreation and protection of what the family has been created and what they've provided, but that's not always what lasts long term. So like that primal, let me just procreate and spread my seed instinct, those partners are not always the best when it comes to fatherhood. They're very good at creating the life, but maybe not as good as sticking around and raising the life. And then the ones who are good at that, most women don't find sexy because they're nerdy, they're vanilla, they're secure, they're all the things that you really do.
They're boring.
Yeah, they're boring, right? Well, they're text me back and hope the door open for me. No, I don't like it.
No, that seems like something's up with that.
That's my word. I want him again.
Well, it's so interesting because I was married for almost 20 years. I got married when I was 18 and we were married a very long time. And early on in our relationship, I had attachment stuff, you know, flare up, but I was 18. So, okay. But then over time, like, it was so interesting. I didn't become aware of how truly disorganized I am until we got divorced, which a lot of people are so confused by, because I mean, he is such an amazing, he's just a very kind, patient man. He is we're very close to this day. And he is still my lighthouse in so many ways. And so that was confusing to me though. And when people talk about, can attachment styles change based on relationships, that is like my prime example of that. Is like, I thought I had my shit together. Like, okay, I might be getting divorced, but like I am very evolved and secure. And then I didn't have him anymore. I didn't have my lighthouse anymore. And that fucked shit up big time.
And this happens when we look even prior to our adult romantic relationships. If we lose an influential figure in childhood, that can also rupture our attachment system and shift them, especially at influential ages. So around 8, when the critical mind develops, in adolescence, when we're having that identity versus role confusion. If a parent left or abandoned, or we were orphaned or anything to that effect, where the parent was not present anymore due to their own choice or life forces taking them out early, unfortunately, that the attachment system will shift because the lighthouse is gone. And that rupture and that change isn't something that can just heal overnight. Like, attachment doesn't change in either direction overnight. It takes time. And if that influential figure, that lighthouse, is not there anymore, we see how far we've come. And it can feel like, wait, no, I didn't realize how many of these interactions that we had in these moments of connection were so beneficial to me feeling secure. I can feel secure simply by being near you. And now that the title has changed or the role has changed, can we still work to be supportive of one another? And it sounds like you're on, at least you're already there, or you're on the track to being there.
No, and we've been there. And so that part is, if anything, it gets sticky probably like when I'm dating and stuff, in the sense that he's still my lighthouse. So
Yes.
he's still and coming from an upbringing with no lighthouse, it's like I'm very attached to that, obviously. But it wasn't that I lost him in that way. And even the shift in the title, yes, when he's dating, the shift in the title is not great on my end. But
lighthouse, yeah.
Yes. Well, and because that is just so his character, that's just so who he is. And so when he's in a relationship, as much as he loves me, I would never expect to be chosen over that, because he will always be the lighthouse of who's in his life actively. I mean, these secure people, what the hell? I don't know what's with them. But so with that though, it just gave me like insights into, I have to, in order for me to show up as secure as I can show up, which is exactly what we're talking about in the sense of choosing our partners based on that, it has to be somebody who can stand, weather the storm. And when I'm saying storm, I mean mine, and that they're able to stay patient throughout that. That's huge for me.
Yeah. And this, when we look at it I can't help but go back to childhood. We all have transitional objects that help us take a piece of home with us when we leave home, when we leave the safety. Night lights, baby blankies, stuffed animals at sleepovers. That's an emblem of my safety and security of home that I take with me. It sounds almost as though your ex is that transitional object of the lighthouse. And so the work can be, how do I find the next lighthouse? Now that I know a lighthouse exists and he will always be there, how can I lean on that security, much like I may have if I had that from childhood with my parents, and go find a person? It's just a little bit different timing for you, but what a gift to give yourself, to go, okay, wait, I already have that. And if I found it once, I can definitely find it again.
Sure. And I completely agree. And Richard, don't let any future girlfriends listen to this episode, because you will be dumped after, and I apologize in advance.
Or they will be locked down immediately.
That's true. They're like, oh shit, he is a lighthouse. Hold on tight. I'm not leaving. Yeah, maybe I'm promoting his dating life right now.
Inadvertently promoting, yes.
What's that?
Inadvertently promoting his, secure attachment.
How do you help like your clients, so when they're experiencing that, and they're transitioning from relationship to relationship and really seeing the shift in their attachment styles, what is the meaning that you help them make of those experiences?
I aim to help them develop insight as to what those changes look like on the surface. How are they interacting with people differently? And what does it feel like internally for them to interact differently? If they would have previously been frantically answering text messages and blowing up the phone, and they're not, they can see that it's different. How does it feel to be different? And sometimes it feels great, and sometimes it feels like hell on earth. And they don't want to have to weather that storm alone. And that's where the therapist, being the transitional object lighthouse, if you will, comes in, because it's less shitty to have to go through it when you have someone who can be there and empathize. Yes, it's the worst. I understand all of the urges, to my own knowledge, that you're going through. And let's try to not do that. Or let's wait 48 hours before we freak out. And I kind of give the joke of, as long as it takes somebody to give a missing persons report is the same amount of time that you have to wait before you can freak out having anxious attachment. Like, you're not allowed to do it sooner, because a lot can change in 24 to 48 hours.
Absolutely.
It helps them to understand that it is going to look different. It will be different. And that's your new normal. You're going to retire your old behaviors, as I like to word it, and hire different behaviors to take the place of it. But much like a real company and a corporation, you don't just do a mass firing and expect everybody to feel fine about it. There's going to be some heads rolling. So you slowly retire the old behaviors that aren't helpful anymore. And you take a look at, wow, this would have blown up this otherwise really great relationship. I'm so proud of myself. I'm so happy with myself. I didn't do what my gut told me to do. And I let that person show me who they truly are, because so much of it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I think they're going to abandon me, and I create an environment so intense that any sane or secure person is like, this is chaotic, I can't do this, would leave, we perceive them healthily taking a stand as abandonment.
Yep.
Or the avoidant, well, they were leaving anyway, or they were so needy. It's like, or go with me on this. Did they have some more basic needs that if you've never met them or had them met, you didn't know how to meet them? So you took space away because you didn't want to let them down.
Gotcha.
They're like, oh, probably that
or that. And that that confirmation bias is a big, like, it's what we do. If I believe this is going to happen, or if I believe this to be true, I'm going to find every piece of evidence to support that it's true. I had a client tell me recently, she's been working with me for a couple of years now through attachment stuff. It's been a really powerful journey for her, and she's newly in a relationship, and she's just cracking me up. She had a situation where he didn't text her like he normally does in the morning. And so she was like, no, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to ignore him. He deserves it. And she's going on this whole thing about it. And she was like, and then you popped in my head. So then I sent the text and said, like, you know, she was the one who initiated. And she was like, it was so powerful for me because she did the opposite of what she wanted to.
Yes.
And a big thing that I use with my clients is like, do you want to be right or do you want to be connected? You know, do you want to prove a point or do you want to be connected? And she said, like, you know, the thing that I was craving the most, especially because he didn't text me, was that I was craving connection with him. And so normally I would have just then avoided and ignored. And she said, but, you know, by reaching out, she created the connection. And what a powerful moment that was for her to realize, because that evidence now, next time she's in that same situation, she gets to reflect back on, but when I did it this way, I got my needs met. And it's just, that's huge.
I am smiling because I went through something similar very in the beginning of dating, and he left his phone in his friend's car. Something happened, and it was like 12 to 15 hours that I didn't hear from him. And I went about my day, as hard as it was. I was like, I have meetings and this and that. This also highlights how important it is to have your own life and break out of those codependent or anxious attachment tendencies of like waiting, canceling plans, leaving too much space open in hopes that somebody's going to fill it. Once you live and create your own fulfilling life, it is easier to surf those urges when the codependency or anxious attachment comes up. And I remember like freaking out, and I was like, that's it. I'm going to leave. This is so disrespectful. I had convinced myself I'm like Michael Bay. I can convince myself of the most dramatic scenes in the world. And then he called me while I was like mid meeting, and I was like, hey, in a meeting. He was like, okay, no worries. I just found my phone. I left it in so-and-so's car. I'm on my way to pick you up for lunch. And all of me was just going to be like, are you fucking kidding me? After you abandoned me? I don't think so. But part of me, I did no, he's literally honest. He has no clue how you've been feeling the last however many hours. You can either choose to blow this up and be a bitch like you have been in the past, or you can just ride the wave. And what would a secure person do? And I was like, okay, sounds good. And I shared calmly at lunch, hey, I do want to let you know I did kind of freak out, and 14-year-old me showed up. Next time, could you try and get a hold of me using something else? And he's like, yeah, no problem. It's never happened again. So when you don't go through that, I'm going to blow this up because I've convinced myself of them being this terrible person. And this also relates to evolutionary psychology because it's so primal. Women think that if you felt a certain way about us, you would act a certain way. And that's not necessarily how men work. And when we don't get what we want, we are far more susceptible to criticism as women. So we think that if we criticize you or withhold from you or punish you or do all these things, that'll teach you. That's not what's going to happen. You are going to look crazy, and then you'll be categorized as a crazy ex. And then people wonder what, like, the feedback loop continues that we're trying to get away from in dating. So if you surf the urge, what would my most secure self do? And if you don't know, then just research a shit ton about secure attachment and memorize their behaviors and emulate them until it becomes real.
And I often encourage it's the action, the opposite action, right?
Yes,
so yes, exactly, the DBT approach. So if your tendency is to ignore, consider reaching out. If your tendency is to lash out, consider toning it down, you know. But I mean, also, I'm speaking to myself on this. Like, I definitely can completely relate. Can you explain real quick, like when you keep talking about surfing the urge? I love that. Can you help people understand what that is and how they could do it?
Yes. So surfing the urge also comes from dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, where when you have an urge to do something, instead of immediately giving into the impulse, which in the kind of brain neuron connection, the more space and time you give with a compulsion or an action urge, and act space away from the urge happening to actually doing it, the more that bond breaks. So your compulsions will lessen. And it also is used to treat like OCD tendencies or full-blown OCD. So instead of giving into the compulsion, you sit there and you learn to tolerate the discomfort that comes with it. And ultimately, if you still end up doing it, at least you bought yourself some time and space from immediately giving into what the urge is. So you surf it and you ride the wave of it, no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter how rough the waters are, you try and find a lighthouse. And then at the other side of it, oftentimes, and like doing other techniques like putting your face in a bowl of ice water, if that's not a trauma-inducing incident, taking something and putting your physical aggression out, doing some push-ups, taking a lap around the block, something physical to get that response out of your body, because it is very physiological. And then take a deep breath and ask yourself, okay, it's been 5 minutes. If I still have the urge, still, what would my most secure self do? So don't give into the impulse right away. That primal innate instinct is coming with you from evolution and infancy. It's not what you need to do in adulthood. That's little you acting out, and you need to have control of little you.
And remind little you that you've got them.
Yes.
Like, hey, like I appreciate all the work you've done for me to keep me safe, but I got you. Like you can calm down now and let me keep you safe. And sometimes that symbolic gesture of just reminding little you that you're here now and you're going to take care of it can be a really powerful thing. And that surfing the urges, like you're saying, increases the tolerance to be able to sit in that distress and allows for that adaptation to take place. And, you know, Viktor Frankl talks about that in between the stimulus and that reaction, that there's this space, this like little pocket of time that I feel is so important to point out, because a lot of people are like, but it's just a gut reaction, but I just do it, but I don't even think about it. It just happens. And while I know that it feels that way, there is that little gap of time that you get to decide what to do with it. And sometimes, like you're saying, it is go run around the block and just take a beat.
Yeah, and call a pause or a timeout. If you start to notice, even when the train has left the station and you've already lashed out, you could go, nope, I am sorry. Can I please try that again? That was not what I wanted to have happen. And I've had to do that many times.
Yeah.
And you show, if you can tolerate more of your human side and work on, this is where that quote of like the self-love, the self-trust, the self-reliance, but not to a hyper independent level. Once you can learn to be with yourself and integrate the parts of yourself that you're afraid somebody else might find out about you, it's a lot less scary to go through the world, because if anybody finds that out about you, guess what? You already knew it and they can't use it against you. So it makes it a lot easier to be a healthy and safe individual. And then you own it. I'm sorry, I was just about to yell at you because I call her the dragon lady. My dragon lady was about to be unleashed. And that's not fair to you, because this is about me being hungry. You actually did nothing wrong. Can I try it again? And he's always like, sure. Again,
he's like, yeah, babe. I mean, duh.
Your attachment. I both hate and envy, and I'm just like, what? But I also love him. I don't actually hate him at all. It's envy where I just stare at him and I'm just like, you're the best. This is the coolest thing with you. Like, it's just so cool. And he's like, I remember one thing that made me burst into tears. This was a while ago. We were sitting there playing cards on like a camping trip. And I remember talking to him about like fears about parenthood, et cetera. And he was just like, our kids will know what real love is. And I was just weeping, like weeping after all I've explained to him. And I have, I have parents that are still together, but I had my own stuff from childhood, and every parent has their own stuff while they're raising themselves and raising us at the same time. And that was such a big fear, is knowing how important those attachment systems are. And it F's you up in the mind when you learn just how much you can screw kids up if you get it wrong, and how to get it right. And I just was feeling so stressed and pressured. And he was just cool as a cucumber. Like, it's going to be fine. We'll figure it out. They'll know what real love is. And I was just like, I love you. Like, this is the best thing ever. Thank you. He's just the best. I use him as a model so many times in my life and in my teaching. And then I go home and tell him, I'm like, and I apologize for last night and being a psycho. And he's like, okay, what do you want for breakfast? Like,
such a beautiful lighthouse you have.
yeah,
hold on tight. Yes, this is such a good conversation and so helpful for so many people who can hear two mental health professionals talking about like as much as knowledge as we have and as much experience as we have in it, like we still struggle. We are still human like everyone else.
Yep.
And this, that there is hope, but also you can mess up and it's okay. That self-compassion piece is so huge. Like you can be human and that's okay. We're all just doing literally the best we can.
Yes.
At least trying to. Talia, where can people find you? Social media or website?
Yes, my website and my social media handle are the same. So it's taliabombola.com. I'm most active on Instagram. I'm trying to get started on TikTok, but I am doing so by dragging my heels. Eventually I might be on there, but for right now, Instagram is the best way to find me.
Well, very good. I really appreciate you hanging out with me today. I just adore you. You are so funny. You're so real. I just have, so much respect for the work that you're doing. So thank you for hanging out with me.
Thank you. And the feeling is mutual.
Thank you. Thank you, Talia, for hanging out with me today and for sharing all about your attachment journey. And thank you all for hanging out on Relatable Relationships Unfiltered. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, sign up for my newsletter, and find me on Instagram at Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick.